Welcome to the MESPA Principal Podcast, and this is Principal Brett Dobster from Lake Marion Elementary in Lakeville, Minnesota, and today our special guest is Dr. Brad Gustafson of Greenwood Elementary in Wayzata, Minnesota. And Brad is not just a principal, he's an author, a foodie, a fisherman, a reader, collaborator, a mentor, and of course, fellow podcaster. Brad, welcome to the MESPA Principal Cast.
Hey, Brett, it's so good to connect. If my young kids listen to this, they would mock me right now when you said foodie because I burnt some steaks last week and they said they were more like hockey pucks. So I think I lose any food credibility, or at least I lost any with them. Hey, I'm noticing in video, and I'm sorry if anyone's listening just to the audio version and missing your awesome hair right now, but it looks like you and I are rocking the quarantine hairdo.
We are. In fact, my wife was making a comment about my hair the other day, and she said, "When's the last time you got your hair cut?" And I looked it up, and it was January 25th. So I have not had a haircut since then, besides taking a little away from my ears. And so this is hippie Brett right here. So.
Yeah, same here. And it kind of feels good. I'm kind of having high school flashbacks, although I believe it or not, I used to be blonde in high school. Now I say that I'm silver gray.
You were blonde in high school?
Or I'm silver. Yeah, I was. I know. I tell my kids that and they don't believe it. Anyway.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it's funny how we all change. Here's a little something, Brad, that you didn't know. I used to have hair down below my shoulders. Like I grew my hair out when I was in the 90s. Back in college, I had grown my hair out. And when I did my first student teaching, I was like, I'm going to cut my hair and like look professional again. And then I've never gone back. Obviously,
that is a fun Brett fact that I never knew. I love that.
Yeah, it was. I remember all the phases of growing it out, and then like once it finally got long enough, I could put it in a ponytail. I cut it off. So go figure. But the 90s, guys had long hair. Like you saw more people.
And I had longer, not like you're describing, but more kind of the front. The only way I could say more of like a surfer look, and I split it down the middle, and I thought it was the coolest thing. My wife kind of mocks me to this day, so maybe it didn't look as good as I thought it did, but man, it was nice to have hair. Things have kind of receded over time, but what do you do?
It's the aging process for all of us, right? So Brad, I mentioned. Oh, go ahead.
Here's a joke for Rachel in the MESPA office who maybe helps out with some editing here. Like this would be the real point to start this podcast because this is. I'm sorry to disappoint Brett, but it's been all hair and reliving the glory days so far. Maybe we'll have some substance.
Can we cut that all out? So now here we actually, so now to kind of get to the meat of this, Brad, you wear a lot of hats, and you're also a nationally distinguished principal. I mentioned an author before, and one of the first books that you wrote was Renegade Leadership, and I have to say that it was instrumental in the way I think of digital leadership, but it doesn't have to be the focus of what your leadership is. It happens to be a component of how you can lead and how you can utilize tools. Talk a little bit about how you came to decide to write Renegade Leadership. Like what led you to that path?
Yeah, great question. So when we wrote Renegade Leadership, and I just use that intentionally because it has over 30 different educators' voices and stories and examples in it. But the spirit of the book is was like asking, would you want that for your kids in the day and age that they're living in, that we're living in? Would you want that for them? Or could it be different? Should it be different? Could it be better? Should we relook at that? Even things that worked incredibly well 5 or 10 years ago, have they evolved a little bit more? And we also need to do that. So that was kind of the spirit of it. It was a little bit manifesto. I don't even know if I should use that word because I'm not totally sure what it means, but it was kind of like a stake in the ground. Like, here are the things that a lot of us think are important, and we're always learning and our thinking can change. But it was a framework to look at things from a leadership lens too, like even staff meetings and communications and working with kids and newsletters, and the list goes on and on and on, community engagement. Through a lens of, I called it the code, the Renegade code, which I still use and think about like on a daily basis, and just the 4 really basic levers. And not that we have to play or putz with all the levers at once, but maybe just adjusting one lever on one tradition that you're doing, or one assembly, or one distance learning Zoom meeting, to see how the result might be more engaging or responsive to the needs of the staff. And ironically, Brett, I've finding like I'm re-looking at that book more and more the last couple of weeks and months than I had for a year or so. And I think with some of the distance learning stuff, it just prompted me to circle back to it. And partly because everything in that book is underpinned by the importance of connectedness and relationships. It's not just, let's do fluffy tech, let's get out the drones and kazoos and have fun, but it's really like, how might we make this thing called education that we get to do together more meaningful for the kids and the people we serve? So.
It's interesting that you mentioned code, because your most recent blog post, just from last week, you revisited that and writing about it. And when so Brad, what is making you? Because I'm a person, like, we record this episode of the podcast, and this will be a great conversation, and I'll be thinking about it, but I don't go back and listen to it again. Part of that's because I can't handle hearing myself, but the other part is like you kind of go, okay, I put a lot of energy into preparing for this. We had this conversation, and then we move on. Now, when you're with a book, when you get to the point of, okay, I feel really good about it, I've kind of talked about it with other people, and then you've walked away. You said you've walked away for a year. What brings you back to something that you wrote? What inspires you to do that?
So it wasn't that I walked away from thinking about and trying to live out some of the renegade traits, but it was more like actually rereading the book is what I've been doing, because I've wanted to go deeper and remind myself. But the code framework is something that, like, you and I and principals, we hear from a lot of different speakers and authors and stuff. And for me personally, I needed a framework that I could remember it in full transparency. So for me, I could remember 4 letters, collaboration, ownership, digital connectivity, and experiential learning. Those are 4 things. So I really just tried to distill it down. So those are the things. And I used to actually have it taped up next to my desk, just so every email that I was responding to, I just had that in mind. Like, how am I empowering other people to own this? Is this an experience, or am I trying to take the easy way out, or the path that's been traveled 100 times that might not be serving kids as well as we want it to? Now, kind of fortunately, I no longer have it pinned up next to me, partly because, you train yourself to think about something every day and it just kind of becomes second nature. But going back to actually read through the pages and the stories, it was more just, this sounds really weird, but I'm the type of person, I'll watch a movie and then 3 years later I can watch it again, and it kind of almost feels like I'm watching it the first time. That's really scary, but that was it for the book too. It's like, geez, I'm going to reread this just to make sure I'm not missing anything, or kind of remind myself of what I've always been passionate about, but just I'm going to read it again. So,
well, and what is your core and what has evolved? I'm sure, like, when you're writing and you're really putting all this energy into collaborating with others and thinking about what it is you want to put into words, in that constant revision and editing process, if you come back another year later, it's like, okay, so what have I learned since then? What would I, if version 2 came out, what would I be changing? Because I think in leadership as principals, we, like, your first 3 years where you're just absorbing everything and you're figuring out, how does this fit into my core, my values? And then your next 3 years, you have so much more that you can, you've seen patterns, you've experienced things where you can now guide and lead in a different way than when you're first learning how to be that leader. I think that we're constantly building ourselves into being somebody, the next evolution, right?
we are, yeah. And I've heard people say, like, you're never really done writing a book. You just kind of have to say goodbye and part with it. Otherwise, you'd be constantly rewriting and updating it. As you were kind of reflecting there, I was reflecting back, like, what would I change? Certainly some of the examples probably in the book, but some things like the code framework, because of everyone whose voice went into it and the passion and the research, that it was student-centered and trying to give ownership to the people that we're serving and the people closest to the work, something that principals, like, we're not always the best at, or it's a daily commitment. We have to get up and keep honoring the people who are in classrooms. But those things haven't changed. And the fact that relationships underpin, I think relationships still underpin, and maybe even more so when it's hard, and maybe we took them for granted, or I took them for granted, just that we would see kids again tomorrow face to face in this quarantine pandemic time. I don't know, just it all rings true. Not just that book, but anyone who talks about how they're investing in other people and kids and listening and keeping things relational in a digital sense or in tech-rich environment. Like I'm interested. Tell me more, because I want to learn how you do that, because I want to get better at that, especially when one of the primary things we have right now is a screen.
Right. Well, and then how do you build that? When you're talking about leverage, is how do you build that relationship from a distance? And hopefully, we spent the whole beginning of the year building that relationship, so that now we can do things to keep it going. And I have to say, I think that's something we're struggling with as leaders, is how do we stay connected to our families, to our students primarily, right? I mean, that's what we're thinking. But then we're like, okay, but now the student is with their family unit that whole time that they're doing the learning, and how do we connect with their environment? And then something that you and I've talked about in the past is staying connected with our staff. Is they're learning a lot about how to do this distance learning, and they're making a lot of the mistakes that we know just when you're learning something new, and letting them know that we're here to support them, that this is what we are about, and we're going to learn from it. And that's a really tricky part, is to keep those relationships going even when times do get tough, because this has been some of it's been super enlightening. Other parts of it have been a little bit sad, as we've learned about some of the environments that our kids are learning in, and how do we give them the most that we know when they're with us, we can control that environment better, and give them more opportunities where it looks different from the home.
Right. And I think so. I heard you say, that they're making mistakes, and knowing you, I know that you mean that in a growth mindset way.
Absolutely.
Like, no shame
yes.
in that. That's how we learn and get better. I guess the way that I'm kind of looking at it, though, is like they're forging ahead and doing the hard work of figuring it out. I don't even know that I would label a lot of what's happening mistakes. It's like, goodness gracious, they're enduring. Each day is different. They're persevering. Partly they're just showing up, which is hard. And kids and parents and everyone kind of being in it together. But you have me thinking about that word. And I know that there doesn't need to be a stigma. Like me, of all people, I've made a zillion mistakes. So I'm not scared of that word, and I don't think that's bad, but I just don't know if it accurately describes, at least for me, the work that teachers are doing.
You're right. Maybe a mistake isn't the right word. And the only reason why I say it is because there have been things that we have tried and failed at and went, whoa, okay, first Zoom meeting, we had to just hit the eject button, because as you're learning something new. And one of my kindergarten teachers was sharing a story with me about how she got the kindergartners into their first class Zoom, and she didn't have everyone muted. She was just like so excited to hear their voices, and it just turned into everyone was talking over everyone, and she was like, I just lost control, and it was hilarious. But she was like, I'm sure those parents just went, wait, what just happened? Because I just turned the meeting off, because I just didn't know what to do, so I just ended it. And it's one of those where it's the quick learning, the learning lessons. Even though we prepped ahead of time of how to do a group meeting, when you're with adults, everyone takes their turn, everyone waits, and so you're right. It's not mistakes, but some of the stuff we feel like we need to be perfect at. As teachers, we're expected to be the experts in everything, and when it doesn't go well, it sometimes it can feel like a mistake. But you're right, it's from that growth mindset and that learning perspective.
I've had the chance to be part of quite a few class Zooms, and in the bricks and mortar sense, or in the face-to-face sense in the building, I usually walk out of rooms just with a sense of gratitude and admiration, and being just really impressed by what I'm seeing and what our kids get to experience with their teachers. But in these Zoom meetings, I'm like, oh, bless you. But, it's amazing. Like, I was in one recently, and one of the kiddos was just filming their pet rat the whole time. And the teacher was just having a great conversation rolling. And of course, there were 21 other things, or 25 other things happening on screen. And the teacher just was so gracious and kept things moving and engaged with kids and showed them love. And here I am, kind of like squirrel or rats, it's just, it's just something special that it just, unless you're living it, like our kiddos and parents and teachers and principals to a certain degree, you just couldn't really explain some of the educational side of this stuff.
Hats off to our teachers, because they are doing some pretty amazing things with not a lot of time for preparation for what this looked like. And I hope that we'll be able to take a lot of these lessons that we're learning and bring that to what does our next year look like. I think we have just, college does one thing to teach you a lot of lessons, right? You can read, you can hear about theory, you can figure out how that changes your practice. But when you are practicing and having to revise a lot, I think that's going to really help all of us be better when we come back together again.
It reminds me a little bit, Brett, when we get student teachers who apply, or, emerging educators, and they want a job, and you'll see on their resume, I created a social studies unit. And I'm never super impressed by that, because I think everyone creates a social studies unit. Like, tell me more, or what did that look like, or matter to you. But the stuff that we're going through together now is like, okay, as principals even, I don't know how important it is to say I did distance learning or I helped with that. It's like, well, we're all kind of doing that. So tell me how you had kiddos thriving. Tell me how you were responsive to parents. Tell me how kind of you made a difference. Tell me how you helped teachers and listened and adjusted. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. Like, kind of getting back to that recent blog post, like, what does it look like? Why does it matter? Give me the depth. What were you wrestling with, and what solutions did your team, what solutions were born? What new thinking that led to deeper meaning and impact resulted?
It's and that reflection is such a key piece, whether you're new to career or whether you're just experiencing a lesson in a day, is really, how do we get better from this? Or what did I learn about some students? Because that's what I think is oftentimes we're just some end of the year grading, and like the hold harmless factor, and what did we learn about some students, and because some students have actually thrived. We've done really well with having prescriptive, knowing what's happening this week, and they're participating in all the chats, and it surprised some people, like, wow, I never would have expected this would be in your wheelhouse. And it's fun hearing teachers talk about, I never knew this about this child.
So when you say that, this is exciting to me. When you say some kids thrived, which I've seen too, like, wow, that's great. Glad that you're loving life and getting a lot out of this. It reminds me of what you said right when we first started today. I don't know if we had even hit record yet, but talking about like, what are we going to carry over once the school year starts, whether it's a hybrid model or something similar or more of a traditional model. But like, those are the conversations I'm excited to have specifically. Like, what'd you notice that actually in these tragic times, what actually really helped kids, and what were they excited about? And then and why was that? What's different about it, and what did we miss before, and what might we be able to do with more kind of ongoing resources and sustained PD in that, and support? Like, what if we actually made some real changes based on some of the silver linings and positive things that we saw?
Absolutely. And Brad, you and I years ago have had the conversation about standardized testing. So this is our first year without having a formal standardized test to assess progress on the standards. So without that pressure, but having a different level of pressure coming from distance learning, what did we see improve? What did we see change in the way you were thinking? Because we all know when spring comes, there is a little bit of level of pressure. Even though we say testing doesn't matter, there's still a little piece of that comes through, right? Because we still want to show that our students know what they know. And I know that teachers actually felt like, okay, wow, I don't have to worry about a test. So how do I make sure that the kids are really digging deeper into this? And it's like, oh, well, then go with it. Like, that's what we want you to do. Like, take that time to go deeper. If you see your kids are showing genuine excitement and they're wanting more, then that's where let that drive some of your teaching. And it's something that's exciting, because some of those conversations don't naturally happen in the springtime. And
the thing that, like, the cautionary tale that's goes with what you just said is that
Yeah.
for decades and decades, a system and professional development and school designations and even property values, there's a whole cycle of things that are connected to those tests, and some of it's pretty icky and not very child-centered, and some of it actually helps, a fraction of it helps lead learning, right? So
Yeah.
meaningful assessment is a good thing. Let me be clear on that. But what I would caution, principals, if anyone is kind of judging their school or saying, we tried, let's say they're not satisfied with distance learning, we tried not having tests, and look, my kid floundered, let's keep in mind what you said earlier, the low amount of prep time and resources. I mean, currently the system is not built to do, or at least, maybe in a few weeks worth of investment was to have it be what it is right now. But this isn't our best. This isn't us at
No.
our best yet. We're showing up and giving our best, but imagine if resources and even conversations and your subconscious was wired to help kids thrive as whole learners, then what would that look like over time? And that's a pretty ridiculously exciting question. A quick kind of side story is when, like, if people visit our school to check out what teachers are working on and doing, a lot of times they'll see like pretty cool, meaningful stuff. But one of the questions is, how does that help standardized tests? Or sometimes they word it more eloquently, like, how does that impact student achievement? And usually when they're asking, Brett, to be honest with you, I think they're asking so when they go back to their schools and talk to their principals, they're able, they're prepping, they like what they saw teachers doing, but they kind of want to justify and be ready to answer our questions,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of not the greatest thing. Like, I always encourage people, that's an okay question, but does it have to be the only question? What if it was paired with, what if we always led with maybe two questions? Like, how are we helping this kiddo understand themselves better and achieve at a high level? Or how are we nurturing creativity and helping kids learn at a high level or do well on tests or whatever the case may be? But when there's only one question, and when that question is often linked to or put in our mouths and principals' mouths before we even ask it, then the vicious circle kind of continues, and we've got work to do. So part of this leadership and this opportunity of these times is just conversational leadership. Just like right now, like, let's talk about everything that matters in addition to kids performing well on their assessments.
Brad, every time we talk, I learn. It's I appreciate the perspective and that way of helping shift the conversation, right?
Well,
Because that's
the learning is always mutual. On a side note, so I think you kind of alluded to that. You and I have known each other for many years, but I remember some car rides to ed camps when we
yeah.
first met. Just, I forget how far away they were because I'm kind of directionally challenged like
The
that.
big
But
one was the Wisconsin one.
yes. But just like those are some of my favorite times, just like being captive in a car. Hopefully it wasn't too scary for you, but
It
like
was great.
no pressure of a schedule. Like, we're driving from point A to point B and we get to enjoy learning from one another and catching up and conversing. So anyway, that was a long way for me to say the respect is mutual.
Yeah, well, you know what, for our audience out there, just to know is that to tell you about who Brad is as a leader is when I first jumped on Twitter back in 2009. I followed Brad and several other educators as I was kind of dipping my way into the pool, and I was a teacher at the time, and I reached out to Brad just out from the cold and just said, "Hi, you don't know me, but my name is Brett Domstrand, and I want to be a principal someday." And asked Brad for some time and some advice. And he didn't know me, but he talked about some of the things that I need to make sure that I'm understanding and learning as an aspiring leader. And then when I did finally get my first interview, I reached out to Brad again and said, I got my first interview. And Brad just threw some things for me to be thinking about, not about how to be a better interviewer, but about who I am as a leader. And who do I view myself, and to be able to be true to what I was believing in and what I was doing. And now here I sit as a fellow colleague, and I thank Brad every time I can, and just to say that it really does matter what we do as leaders and our impact on other people. And this can be a lonely job if you choose to let it, or it can be a place of great collaboration and a way to push each other to be better for our kids. And Brad, you modeled it, and you've led me to be that same thing. I want everyone to be better. We're all great, and we can all keep learning and improving. And
yeah, thanks, Brad. It is an isolating, or it can be an isolating profession. You know, I remember teaching, and whether you shut your door or not, you're kind of alone with a bunch of amazing kids all day. And maybe you see people during lunch or as you're sprinting to the bathroom or whatever, you know.
yeah.
But even as a principal too, kind of, it's such a unique role, because at least in a building, there's a very few number of people who are kind of privy to all the great conversations and work and thinking, but also some of the more difficult things. And I think reaching out is such a powerful thing. I think it's like Dave Burgess has talked about education being, or educators being just this so reciprocal. And, you know, I know I've reached out to tons of different people, yourself included, but never have been disappointed. And sometimes people can't chat at that moment. And of course we all get that, but usually I'm surprised at the level of kind of grace and care and just how everyone comes alongside one another. So the moral of the story that I've learned, and what I think I hear you saying, is like, when we reach out to people, they have so much to offer, and I've been benefited from that so much. So any like aspiring principals or even principals that are listening who haven't tried that with one another, it's so cool. Whether it's a principal in your district or not, it's weird how that doesn't matter. We all just care.
You know, it's interesting because today I was doing a reference check on a new hire, and I was looking at the principal, and I said, I know her, and I gave her a call, and she was talking about her first year in principalship, and we had talked early in September during an early career principal training through MESPA, and I talked to her about what she's learned and what she's identified about herself as a leader, and you know, it reminds me of like, we are all connected in such it really is a small world in education and in principalship. And so
I did a reference call. Well, I've done a bunch of reference calls the last 2 days, but a couple of them I'm just thinking, and that literally this is yesterday and today, you know, your phone is you can see the timer on it or whatever. And it's like, goodness gravy, this principal has given me 40 minutes of their life just to talk about someone who hasn't even worked in their building for a year or two. And I think that says a lot about the principal, but I also think it says about how much they care about the people that they serve, i.e. teachers who they just want to share what the great things they know about them and support them and have them land in a great spot. It's just a really cool thing. And that's probably another element that I know when I was a teacher, I didn't think too much about unless it was a principal maybe doing a reference for me, but like there are, it's just really cool. It's really cool to have someone be so giving of their time.
Mhm. You know, Brad, so earlier I was mentioning that you are a doctor, first of all. Congratulations, because I know the hard work that it is.
Thanks.
What led you to decide to pursue doctoral work? You've got younger kids. I mean, I know your kids are only one left in elementary school, but you chose to go after your doctorate while being a principal, while having younger children, and trying to balance that. What made you pursue it, number one? And number two, how did you keep your life in balance while being an author and also a doctoral student?
It feels too cliche and dorky to even say out loud, but since you asked, I won't skirt the question. It's just, like, I just love learning, and I'm so sorry that that's so like cliche. I wish I could give you a more exciting answer, but it's an expensive hobby, right? I think that's
Right.
another reason why I really also enjoy social media and reading blogs and researching on my own, because you don't have the bills associated with it that you do school. But it was the first class I took. So I got my degree at Bethel University. It was a hybrid online situation. So lots of classes at home around hours that work for me, but also every summer we'd all get together in person for a couple weeks. So it was really cool, because then you knew the people that you were interacting with in forums over the year. But I totally forgot where I was going. You took me down doctoral road and my mind just turned to mush.
Well, you're tying together about how do you manage to balance it all out, pursuing the doctorate, being a family, being an author.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was gonna say is the first class alone that I took, it was on assessment, which, okay, you know, but I walked out of there thinking, okay, if this is all I get from the next several years of this program, it's worth it. That is how ridiculously good, or the scary part, how, and this is probably just me, not like other principals, but like how ignorant I was on some assessment practices. It's like, oh my gosh, this is stuff that actually is going to help me be like better, or a more critical consumer of research, or not just take things at face value, but ask better questions. And even when we're making, having conversations at the district level about assessment and things like that, like just different questions to ask that actually serve kids and learners, I can actually maybe contribute or almost hold my weight a teeny bit. Like one of the biggest things, Brett, in case people are wondering, like one of my biggest takeaways from that was, to what degree is this assessment making an instructional contribution? Or, in simpler terms, what's the instructional contribution of this assessment? And if the answer is, well, I don't really know. It's to showcase growth, or, which is an okay answer, but like, is it really, like, to what degree is this serving kids and helping us teach differently and better for that kiddo? Like, that's a question I know I've circled back to multiple times every year. So that's just one little example. That's more of a bird walk from your original question. And then the balance thing, I don't know. I think it's like anything. If you're passionate about tennis, you're going to find a way to balance playing tennis in your work, So
Yeah.
I'm passionate about reading and stuff like that, and writing. So find a way to do it. My wife is incredibly supportive. We have kind of an interesting relationship where she has her passions and things, and I have mine. And by that, I mean, like, I actually like cooking. And I think she's happy that I like cooking, because that's not her passion. So, she was mowing the lawn today. And I remember, that's just for some more traditional families. Not, I don't think anyone should ever be like gender hamstrung. That's not appropriate. But for us, we've worked things out in a way that feels really good for us as a partnership. And that allows me also to do the things that I get to do to try to make a difference. But I do remember in my first principal job, Deb was pregnant with one of our kiddos, and I forget if it was a second or third kid, but she, like, 9 months pregnant. Okay. She's out mowing the lawn, and then an older male neighbor who I didn't know came and just reamed me for making her mow the lawn. And I had to laugh. I'm like, do you know my wife? Like, I can't make her do anything. She's amazing. She's independent. This is a partnership. Like, buddy, you go try to stop her from mowing the lawn. She's trying to mow the lawn to have a baby. Okay. Anyway, she ended up going into labor that day, Brett, which was kind of her plan. You know what I mean? So she's very smart too, very intuitive.
Brad, you're making me think of something when you were talking about that pursuit of learning. And I had Dr. Katie Pickell from the University of Minnesota on our last episode, and she said the thing about earning your doctorate is it teaches you to be a better thinker. And that is something that I'm learning is the more you think about things, then it allows you to apply that thinking into all these new situations. And even though that's not exactly what you were saying, just what you learned about assessments, what you learned, what you thought about, what you're applying now down the road. I mean, now you're a few years out from having your doctorate. It just resonated with me. So I just wanted to.
I feel like I feel like you're baiting me here, Brett, to really let my nerd flag fly. So I've been holding back, but you keep asking about research and stuff. So here it comes, people. Tune out now. But like with this doctoral thing, just subconsciously, and as I'm reading, like all research is not created equal. That's one of the things I learned. So now when I read, I have a more discerning eye, like looking at the generalizations being made about study X, Y, and Z. Cause I've heard people say, and it feels kind of true, like you can find research to kind of prove and support anything. I mean, that's how it seems. So like sampling methods and the population and the inferences made and they're even on peer-reviewed stuff. It is fascinating. So as as principals are reading, as I'm reading stuff, I ask different questions too. And I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I do kind of get a kick out of just not reading it and accepting it at face value. It's like, tell me more.
Right?
Let's
you have
dig
a more
little
critical eye.
Yeah. Let's dig a little deeper here. So.
Yeah, it does change your thinking. You just learn to want to know, well, what's the source? How was this done? It just, when you start learning quantitative and qualitative methods, and you start getting, it's like, like it some of it makes sense, and it's like, I just didn't think this way. And then once you're made aware, you can't step away from that thinking, right? And
Right.
that's
Yes.
that pursuit of education is
And when you talk about qualitative and quantitative, the balance in that, numbers alone don't tell the whole story. Sometimes the story matters. Sometimes the
Mhm.
context matters, and those themes. And qualitative research should not be dismissed. It's a little bit harder to put in a PowerPoint and quote and cite, but that's really important stuff too. Because interestingly enough, every principal in Minnesota will, I you know I'm assuming will kind of nod their head at this, but like, you can tell us all to do something because the research says it, or that 99% of schools had favored positive results. But if you don't factor in the context and the kiddos and their stories and some of the politics and different support structures and the resources and how the district functions, I mean, all of that matters. And that's why
Mhm.
leadership is so awesome, and so challenging. But just like teaching, there's the art and the science, and it's really hard to separate the two.
It's interesting when you said that there's a story, right? It's not just about what the data says. Is I'm going to use that to shift us into another question, and that's the story of reclaiming our calling. We talked about renegade leadership in the beginning, and reclaiming our calling is a very different story. I've mentioned this to you because I said, Brad, I feel like this is like a story, but it also has like this educational facet of what we're doing in the classroom. And so because I enjoyed the story so much, and I joked with you about this. It was my Mexico vacation book, and I sat out on the beach
And
and
I
read it.
joked right back at you saying, the next time you do a book selfie, we need some spray tan on the legs or something.
It was the middle of February, everyone, but
Just,
it was a book though that I gobbled up, and without revealing too much, the story just really it helps paint a lot of pictures. And so, Brad, how did you decide to write a story like this that is more of a following characters through a story?
yeah. So, I love creating. I love challenging myself and stretching myself, and I love reading books, including PD books that incorporate stories. Like Jimmy Casas is an example, or if you hear a George Couros keynote, there's so much heart and stories that helps you apply the lessons and the principles and the thinking, and kind of really makes them sticky. And I wanted to write a book that I wanted to read. So that's what I tried to do, kind of modeling after those, including other people who inspire me and who I learned so much from. So it is packed with stories, and it kind of follows like the DNA of the book is stories, and it follows a few key, people,
Yeah,
including,
I say characters, but yes,
yeah, a
people.
couple kiddos or students, a teacher, so that the theory and the practicality of it, the try this sections, is grounded in a whole story of people's lives. Because absent that, you can tell people to try, technology integration or building relationships, but like doing that without regard to the people that are experiencing it, or that's a different story. So it's interesting. I don't remember how long the book is. I feel like it might be, 270 pages. Sounds familiar. I could be wrong about that.
270 pages. Brad, let me do a
Okay,
reference check
fact
on
check.
this.
See,
And
there's only one person in MESPA who fact checks during the conversation.
245 pages.
245.
245.
Okay, maybe I was counting the, appendices or something. Anyway, the intent is that those stories, and for how long the book is, that you read it in a way that it feels good, and it's like you're not each night banging your head or staring at the book on your dresser, but it's a surprisingly quick read.
It's a
And
quick
people
read,
have told me
yes.
that too, like, geez, I sat down and did that in 1 day or 2 days, which ordinarily, when you look at like a 240 page book, that's not always what happens to me. It usually takes a week or so.
Well, it was nice because it's chunked in a way that you can be reading it and you're following the story as it goes, and you make that connection to education in such a nice way. Now we're running out of time, and there's two
Yep.
things I want to mention is that we're going to talk about Scholastic and your love of books at the end here, but earlier you said your stake in the ground, and you are a fellow podcaster, and you've been a guest on many podcasts as well. Everyone, you can just type in Brad Gustafson and on your Apple or your Stitcher or whatever it is you choose, and you'll find Brad's name in a lot of podcasts. But you do Unearthed with Ben Gilpin, and so that model is brief, short, really to the point, hard hitting though, with good questions with your guests. How did you and Ben decide to come up with the idea of Unearthed?
Okay, I'm going to give you the story that hardly anyone, like there might only be 2 or 3 people on this planet that know this story, okay? So Ben and I just started out kind of wanting to do a school leadership podcast. And we had this idea to do one called Real Deal Ed, or something equivalent to that, where we would kind of gamify it and have it kind of like the best of Jimmy Fallon, like the cool, fun games, but interacting. That was the goal or the vision. And we had somebody on, and they were amazing. This principal we started interviewing was so good, as she always is. Ben and I were, well, I'll speak for myself. Ben is very wise. I was not good. And the show just felt like a flop. And it felt like we were trying to do a podcast instead of trying to learn or help people, or it almost felt like we were trying to do games or something. It didn't work. And from that, we had an awesome conversation with our producer, who just guided us artfully, like, what's your purpose? What's, X, Y, and Z. And from there, Unearthed was born, where we're just looking at, like, let's have deeper and different dialogue about things instead of on Twitter, people are tweeting quick things and who knows how much thought. And sometimes they're very wise things, but it's like, well, tell me more about that. How does that actually work? What were the barriers? How did it make a difference for a kiddo? So that's kind of the impetus for the show. And I'd be remiss if I didn't at least say it, because I've been thinking a lot about this the past couple of days, but my buddy Ben Gilpin in Michigan, his gift, he has many, but one of them is he's so insightful. Like, you could just talk to him and there are layers there, kind of like where I often think to myself, like, I didn't even think about that. And that's cool. And that's nuanced. And he noticed that. It's like, it's so cool to have a conversation where we each kind of have our role on the show, and his is like thinking and credibility, and I need to figure out what mine is. But anyway,
I call you're like the hype man.
The hype man. There you go. Yes. That's what I
do. You bring the energy. It's the two of you definitely have that contrasting personality. But I've talked with both of you in more of the collegial conversation, and it's true to both of you though. Like, what it is it's just amplified both of your personalities, and in such a short burst. It's very everyone Unearthed, or it looks like Unearthed Ed if you look at it on your podcast. It's definitely worth a listen. So,
and there is like a 10-second educational reason we do it too. So even before wanting to do this kind of gamey show, I should speak for myself, just wanted to get in those waters of digitally connecting, because if I'm not doing that, if I'm not learning and modeling and wrestling with it, how on earth am I ever going to support a student who's dreaming of maybe being a YouTuber, or a staff member? If I'm in an observation and they're looking for ideas, where, we all have these amazing teachers, and you're in there and you're like, duh, keep up the great work. I mean, I think teachers deserve more than that. So if I'm not that, that was the impetus too. Like, if I'm learning in some of these waters, then I might be able to actually help people who are also wanting to do that.
Yeah. Amen. All right. And last thing I've got on our list, our modified podcast for this one is, Brad, you, from whether we're talking about 30-second book talks to the World Book Talks to your conversation, like you're involved in so many different ways with literacy and talking about books, and you have a definite love of reading. Like, you will post about, I can't put this book down. There's just things that I don't know if you give Bradskis for your books or not. I know you do with the food, but so how did you come into this love of literacy? I know you've loved to read, but like, you have been proclaiming all these great authors and books that you've been tackling and wanting to share.
Yeah. So best way I can say it is I was around people who shared their passion with me, and it was contagious, because I don't think literacy leadership was necessarily on my radar until like people like Julie Kirchner and Linda Gibbons. Those are media specialists in our district and who both have worked here and do work here. Linda still works here. But so this, all that to say, like, never underestimate the impact you can have when you're operating from a place of strength and sharing your passion. Because by them doing that and showing up, I started to notice and think, geez, I think this maybe should be on my radar. And then I started to realize, geez, I think I should actually be pulling my literacy weight around here instead of just having these two do it. I don't want to sell our teams, like many people on staff too. So then I thought, like, I'm a part of this school and this place, and I think instead of just being neutral on literacy or supportive or kind of rah-rah, it's like, well, what if I actually was learning and doing the work that we want kids and staff to do and doing it alongside them? So all of that, just from being around people who shared their passion consistently, and then like they would become kind of my book whisperers, where I'd go to them and look for titles for me or for my own kids. And then it's like, well, should they have to do this for everyone? Like, maybe I should actually be aware of some titles to help kids. And just the way that the world works now, sometimes we have kids actually come up to me and ask me what I think they would like. And it's like, that is so awesome. And that had nothing to do with me. That had everything to do with just the leadership around me. And that's an amazing thing.
You know, and Brad, as something you said to me in our last conversation is that when those book fairs come through to your building and they hand you that little form that says your principal recommends or your teacher recommends, fill those out. Make sure that you're knowing the books and share those with the kids, because you never know when a kid's going to go, thanks, Mr. Gustafson, or thanks, Mr. Domstrand. I liked that. Or they might not have direction. And when they see something you recommend, it might make them pick it out.
Yeah, it reminds me with, when we talked about relationships and such, like kids might not be sold on reading yet. They might not have fallen in love with reading yet, but they might love you. They might respect and admire you, whether you're a teacher or principal. So when you bless a book, to kind of use Donald Miller language, or when you endorse or book talk and say, I enjoyed this book, you might have kids actually fall in love with reading, or at least give it a shot, just because they care about you. And that's a really powerful, big deal and responsibility. And we probably don't give ourselves enough credit for the fact that kids look at us in that way, in lots of different ways. But that's one of them.
Well, Brad, we went way over again, and I'm grateful for it, because I just enjoy our conversations. And
if I was gushing over your haircut or your hairdo for the first 10 minutes, I apologize, Brad, but it was worth it.
It was totally worth it. It was totally worth it. We are both sporting some awesome hair, people. So, hey, so Brad, how can everybody find you on the social media?
Yeah, so my website and blog is bradgustafson.com, and that kind of is a hub that can launch you to anything, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, et cetera, yeah. Books.
And he's everywhere. So you can find him. You can check out his podcast. We didn't even get a chance to really talk about his cooking, his cooking inspirations that I love to see, and that one pizza. Oh gosh, you do.
Oh yeah, the hamburger, cheeseburger pizza was incredible. Thank you I'm glad you ended on that, because I didn't want the last thing people have in their mind would be the burnt steak. So now I need people to think like fresh homemade cheeseburger pizza. That's the image we want to leave with.
Right. It's inspiring. So everyone follow Brad. He's at Gustafson Brad on Twitter and Instagram. And Brad, thanks for being on the podcast, and we're grateful for you.
Yeah, thanks for leading the way, Brett.
All right, everyone. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on the MESPA PrincipalCast. And thank you to Rachel Miller and Amy Thompson, who also do the editing here. I want to give a shout out, and check out the 4 at 4 email coming from MESPA every week. There's some great tidbits in there to help you with your leadership. Make it a great day, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this episode of MESPA PrincipalCast. For more information about the Minnesota Elementary School Principals Association, visit mespa.net.